What he didn't know was that by the end of the month, I'd be signing over the entire $4.2 million family estate to my housekeeper's daughter, and he'd be learning about it from the eviction notice. Before we dive into this story, make sure to hit that like button, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe, because trust me, you're going to want to see how this wealthy family's greed led to the most satisfying inheritance reversal you've ever heard. This is about entitlement, respect, and what happens when you underestimate a 70-year-old woman who built everything you're trying to steal. So let me take you back to where this story really begins. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 70 years old, and until 6 weeks ago, I thought I had raised a son who understood the value of family, hard work, and basic human decency. I lived, in the Whitmore Estate, a sprawling 12-acre property in the hills of Marin County, California, complete with a main house, guest cottage, vineyard, and stables that my late husband Charles and I spent 35 years building into something truly special. But to understand how I ended up sprawled on my own driveway while my son drove away without a backward glance, you need to understand the fortune Charles and I created together, and how we went from a young couple with big dreams to the owners of one of Northern California's most successful luxury hospitality empires. Charles and I met in 1973 when I was 22 and he was 25. I was working as an event coordinator for a small catering company in San Francisco, and he was a junior architect at a firm that specialized in hotel and resort design. We were both from middle-class families. My father was a high school principal. His parents owned a small hardware store, so the idea of building serious wealth seemed like a distant fantasy. But Charles had vision that went far beyond just drawing blueprints. Even in those early days when we were dating and saving every penny for our tiny apartment in the Mission District, he'd talk about his dream of creating luxury experiences that people would remember for the rest of their lives. He wasn't just interested in designing buildings. He wanted to understand hospitality, guest services, property management, the entire ecosystem that made high-end resorts and estates successful. I was working in event planning, but my real strength was in operations and finance. I had a natural ability to see inefficiencies and fix them, to manage complex schedules and budgets, to coordinate multiple vendors and staff members to create seamless experiences. My boss at the catering company, Mrs. Henderson, used to say I could organize a wedding for 300 people while balancing the books and still have time to arrange the flowers myself. What started as casual conversations about our work gradually became strategic planning sessions. Charles would share his ideas about property design and guest experience, and I'd talk about the operational realities of actually delivering those experiences. We began to understand that most luxury hospitality businesses failed not because they lacked vision, but because they couldn't execute that vision consistently and profitably. The wedding industry taught me that wealthy clients expected perfection, and they were willing to pay premium prices for it, but only if every single detail was flawless. One small mistake, one moment of poor service, one vendor who didn't deliver exactly what was promised, and the entire experience was ruined. Rich people didn't just want luxury, they wanted the confidence that comes from knowing everything will be handled properly. Charles, meanwhile, was learning the architectural side of creating those perfect experiences. He studied how space design affected guest behavior, how lighting and layout could influence mood, how the physical environment could be engineered to create specific emotional responses. He'd come home from work excited about some new technique he'd learned for maximizing natural light, or a clever way to design privacy into shared spaces. By 1976, we'd saved enough to get married and buy a small house in Marin County. Charles had been promoted to senior architect and was working on several high-profile resort projects, while I'd moved to a larger events company that specialized in corporate retreats and luxury private parties. We were making good money and learning everything we could about the hospitality industry. But more importantly, we were developing a shared vision of what truly exceptional hospitality looked like. We started hosting small dinner parties at our house, partly for fun, but partly as experiments in creating perfect guest experiences. We'd plan every detail obsessively: the menu, the wine pairings, the table settings, the lighting, the conversation flow. Our friends thought we were just naturally good hosts, but we were actually treating each dinner party like a laboratory for testing our theories about luxury hospitality. The breakthrough came when one of our dinner guests, a successful businessman named Robert Chen, approached us after a particularly memorable evening. "Eleanor, Charles," he said, "I've been to some of the most expensive restaurants and hotels in the world, and I've never had an experience as perfectly orchestrated as what you created tonight. Have you ever considered doing this professionally?" "What do you mean?" Charles asked. "I mean, there are a lot of wealthy people who would pay significant money for the kind of attention to detail and seamless execution you demonstrated tonight. Not just for parties, but for retreats, corporate events, even personal celebrations. The problem is finding people who understand that true luxury isn't about expensive things. It's about perfect execution." That conversation planted a seed that would eventually grow into our empire. But we wanted more than just careers in other people's companies. We wanted to build something of our own, something that reflected our understanding of what true luxury, hospitality could be. The opportunity came in 1979 in the most unexpected way. Charles was working on the renovation of a struggling boutique hotel in Napa Valley when the owners ran into serious financial trouble. The property was beautiful, a historic stone mansion on 20 acres with incredible views of the valley, but the owners had no experience in hospitality and were hemorrhaging money trying to run it as a luxury hotel. I accompanied Charles on one of his site visits and immediately saw the problems. The property itself was stunning, but everything about the operation was wrong. The staff seemed confused about their roles. The guest rooms were inconsistently furnished. The common areas felt cold and unwelcoming, and there was no coherent vision tying the experience together. The owners had focused on buying expensive furniture and fixtures, but they'd completely ignored the operational details that actually create luxury experiences. "Charles," I said as we walked through the property, "this place has incredible bones, but they're running it like a mid-tier business hotel. Look at the guest registration process. There's no personal welcome, no attention to arrival experience, no sense that each guest is special. And the event spaces are gorgeous, but there's no proper staging for different types of functions." "The architectural elements are perfect," Charles agreed. "The proportions, the natural light, the flow between spaces, everything you need for an exceptional luxury property. But you're right about the operations. They're treating it like a quantity business instead of a quality experience." The bank was preparing to foreclose when Charles's firm was asked to provide a realistic assessment of what it would take to make the property successful. Charles spent weeks analyzing every aspect of the operation, from the building's structural needs to the staffing requirements to the market positioning. "Eleanor," he said one night over dinner, "this place could be incredible with the right management. The bones are perfect, the location is ideal, and the problems are all fixable with proper planning and execution, but it would require completely reimagining how the property operates." "How much would it cost to fix?" "About $300,000 in renovations and working capital, but the owners are asking $450,000 for the entire property, which is honestly a fraction of what it could be worth with proper management. We didn't have $450,000. We had maybe $60,000 in savings, which wasn't nearly enough for a property purchase of that size, but I had an idea that would change our lives forever. What if we approach this as a partnership opportunity rather than a purchase? We could bring our expertise in hospitality design and operations, find investors who could provide the capital, and structure a deal where everyone benefited from the property's success." I spent the next month developing a comprehensive business plan that outlined exactly how we could transform the struggling hotel into a profitable luxury retreat. The plan included detailed financial projections, operational procedures, marketing strategies, and renovation timelines. More importantly, it showed potential investors exactly how they could expect to see returns on their investment. The key insight in our business plan was that the luxury hospitality market wasn't really about accommodation. It was about transformation. Wealthy clients weren't just paying for a place to sleep, they were paying for experiences that made them feel special, relaxed, and cared for in ways they couldn't achieve at home. Once we understood that, everything else became about designing systems and processes that consistently delivered that feeling. We presented our proposal to 5 different investment groups before finding the right partners. A group of San Francisco businessmen who owned several successful restaurants and were looking to diversify into hospitality. They were impressed, not just by our financial projections, but by our understanding of what made luxury hospitality actually work. The lead investor, a man named David Park, who owned 3 high-end restaurants in the city, said something that stuck with me. Most people think luxury hospitality is about having expensive things. You two understand that it's about making people feel like they're the most important person in the world for the duration of their experience. That's much harder to achieve, but it's also much more profitable. They agreed to provide $400,000 in exchange for 60% ownership, while Charles and I would contribute $75,000 plus our full-time management for 40% ownership. In August 1979, we officially became the managing partners of what we renamed Bella Vista Estate. The first 3 years were absolutely brutal, but they were also the most educational experience of our lives. Charles worked 80-hour weeks overseeing renovations and developing the property's infrastructure, while I managed operations, handled all the financial controls, and gradually built our guest services and event planning capabilities. We lived in a tiny apartment above the property's garage because we couldn't afford our own place while investing everything into the business. Every dollar we earned went back into improving the guest experience. We studied our guests obsessively, tracking what they loved, what disappointed them, what exceeded their expectations. We kept detailed notes on every interaction, every complaint, every compliment. The renovation process was like a master class in luxury hospitality design. Charles worked with craftsmen to restore the historic details while incorporating modern amenities in ways that felt seamless and natural. I developed operational procedures for everything from guest check-in to room service delivery, always with the goal of making each interaction feel personal and effortless. We made mistakes, plenty of them. There was the weekend when our kitchen equipment failed during a high-profile corporate retreat, and I had to coordinate with 3 different restaurants to provide meals that met our standards. There was the time when a celebrity guest's specific dietary requirements weren't properly communicated to our staff, resulting in a very uncomfortable dinner service. There was the wedding where the bride's family had unrealistic expectations about what our staff could accommodate, leading to tension that nearly ruined the entire event. But each mistake taught us something valuable about managing expectations, building redundancy into our systems, and training staff to handle unexpected situations with grace and professionalism. Slowly, Bella Vista began to establish itself as one of Napa Valley's premier luxury retreat destinations. Our combination of Charles's design vision and my operational expertise created experiences that guests couldn't find anywhere else. We weren't just providing accommodation, we were creating memories. The breakthrough moment came in 1982 when a prominent San Francisco family chose Bella Vista for their daughter's wedding. The event was covered in several lifestyle magazines, and the articles focused not just on the beautiful setting, but on the seamless execution and personal attention to detail that made the celebration special. After that, word spread quickly through California's wealthy social circles. We started getting inquiries from corporate executives, entertainment industry figures, and prominent families who were looking for venues that could deliver truly exceptional experiences. By 1983, Bella Vista was consistently booked 6 months in advance and generating profits that exceeded our most optimistic projections. Our investor partners were thrilled with their returns, but more importantly, Charles and I had proven that we could successfully manage and grow a luxury hospitality business. That's when we started thinking about expansion. Over the next 15 years, Charles and I carefully built what became the Whitmore Hospitality Group. We found undervalued or struggling luxury properties, analyzed their potential, structured partnerships with investors, and applied our proven formula of exceptional design combined with flawless operations. Each new property taught us something different about the luxury hospitality market. The boutique hotel in Carmel showed us how to create intimate experiences in smaller spaces. The luxury ranch in Sonoma taught us about outdoor adventure tourism and wine country hospitality. The historic mansion in San Francisco that we converted to exclusive event space gave us expertise in urban luxury and corporate entertainment. But the most important lesson we learned was about the psychology of wealth. Truly rich people weren't impressed by obvious displays of luxury. They were impressed by thoughtful details, by staff who anticipated their needs, by experiences that couldn't be bought anywhere else. The goal wasn't to overwhelm them with opulence, but to make them feel understood and cared for. This understanding shaped every decision we made about our properties. Instead of focusing on the most expensive furnishings or flashiest amenities, we invested in training, systems, and details that created emotional connections with our guests. By 1998, we owned or managed 6 luxury properties throughout Northern California, each with its own character and specialty, but all reflecting our core philosophy about what true luxury hospitality meant. And then we decided to build our masterpiece, the Whitmore Estate in Marin County. The Whitmore Estate started as our personal residence, but Charles designed it to also function as the ultimate luxury retreat and event venue. He'd learned everything there was to know about creating perfect guest experiences, and he wanted to build a property that showcased all of that knowledge in one spectacular location. The main house was 8,000 square feet with 6-bedroom suites, each designed with a different theme and mood, but all featuring the same level of craftsmanship and attention to detail. There was a commercial-grade kitchen that could handle everything from intimate dinner parties to large corporate events. Multiple entertainment spaces flowed seamlessly into each other, creating natural gathering areas for different types of functions. But the real magic was in the outdoor spaces. Charles designed the grounds to include multiple distinct environments: formal gardens for elegant receptions, casual terraces for relaxed gatherings, a vineyard for wine-focused events, stables for guests who wanted horseback riding experiences, and an infinity pool area that seemed to blend into the San Francisco Bay views beyond. The property included a separate guest cottage where we actually lived, allowing the main house to be dedicated entirely to creating perfect experiences for our guests and event clients. But here's what made the Whitmore Estate truly special. Charles and I had designed every aspect of it to showcase what we'd learned about creating perfect luxury experiences. It wasn't just our home, it was a living demonstration of our expertise, a place where we could host potential investors, entertain important clients, and prove that we understood luxury hospitality better than anyone. The estate became the crown, jewel of our empire, but it also became something more personal. It was the physical embodiment of everything Charles and I had built together, a testament to 30 years of shared dreams and hard work. By 2000, the Whitmore Hospitality Group was generating over $18 million in annual revenue. Charles and I had gone from middle-class dreamers to genuine wealth. But more importantly, we'd built something that reflected our values: attention to detail, respect for craftsmanship, and absolute commitment to exceeding expectations. We'd also created something that would last beyond our own lives. The properties we'd developed were generating consistent income, the systems we'd created were sustainable, and the reputation we'd built gave us access to opportunities that most people could only dream of. The key detail that would become crucial later was how we'd structured our business empire. While Charles was the public face of Whitmore Hospitality and handled most of the design and development decisions, I was the one who managed all the legal structures, financial arrangements, and ownership documentation. Most people, including our own children, saw Charles as the hotel guy, and me as his supportive wife who helped with the business side. The reality was more complex. While Charles was absolutely essential to our success, I was the one who held the legal ownership structure together. All the incorporation papers, property deeds, partnership agreements, and financial accounts listed me as the primary owner with Charles as the operating partner. We'd structured it that way on the advice of our lawyers and accountants, partly for tax reasons and partly because my background in operations and finance made me better equipped to handle the legal and financial complexities of managing multiple properties. When our children were growing up, Marcus, born in 1981, and his younger sister Victoria, born in 1984, they saw Dad as the creative visionary who designed beautiful spaces, and Mom as the woman who made sure everything ran smoothly, behind the scenes. They knew I was involved in the businesses, but they thought of it as support work rather than ownership. They'd grown up on the estate, surrounded by luxury and comfort, but they'd never really understood how that luxury was created or maintained. This perception became even more entrenched after Charles's first stroke in 2010. He was forced to step back from active management, and we hired professional managers to handle the day-to-day operations of our properties. Charles continued as the official figurehead of Whitmore Hospitality for public purposes, but I was running the empire behind the scenes. The children, now adults with their own lives and careers, saw this transition as Mom taking care of Dad's business interest while he recovered. They didn't understand that I'd been the actual owner all along. When Charles died in 2020 after a second stroke, the children naturally assumed that I'd inherited his hospitality business and would probably sell the properties to fund my retirement. Marcus, who had always shown some interest in the family legacy, approached me about potentially taking over the management of the estate and maybe buying some of the properties from me. What he didn't realize was that I wasn't inheriting anything. I already owned it all, but I was 65 years old, recently widowed, and emotionally exhausted from managing a complex business empire while grieving my husband. Marcus seemed genuinely interested in preserving what Charles and I had built, and he had some good ideas about modernizing our operations and expanding into new markets like destination weddings and corporate wellness retreats. When he proposed taking over the management of the Whitmore estate and gradually assuming control of the hospitality business, I agreed, but not in the way he thought. Instead of selling him anything, I restructured our arrangement as a management partnership. Marcus would handle all operations and business development for the estate and our other properties. He could live in the main house, manage the property, book events, oversee staff, and collect substantial management fees. I'd retain ownership, but step back from day-to-day involvement, essentially becoming a hands-off owner who received rental income but didn't interfere with operations. Marcus was absolutely thrilled with this arrangement. He got to live in a $4.2 million estate, run a prestigious luxury business, and build his reputation in the hospitality industry without having to come up with the capital to actually buy the properties. From his perspective, he was essentially the owner of the Whitmore estate, and I was his elderly mother who received some income from the property as part of my retirement plan. I never corrected this perception because it seemed to work for everyone. Marcus could feel like the successful entrepreneur he wanted to be, and I could enjoy a comfortable retirement in the guest cottage without the stress of managing events and high-maintenance clients. The legal documents clearly stated our actual arrangement, that I owned everything, and Marcus was essentially a very well-compensated property manager. But Marcus never really focused on those details. He was too busy enjoying the lifestyle and prestige that came with his estate, and for 3 years, everything seemed perfect. Marcus was doing an excellent job managing the property, booking high-end events, and maintaining the standards Charles and I had established. He'd upgraded the technology, modernized some of the marketing, and attracted some impressive new clients, including several Silicon Valley executives and entertainment industry figures. His wife, Catherine, had been instrumental in this success. She'd handled much of the social media and digital marketing, had redesigned some of the interior spaces to create a more contemporary feel while maintaining the estate's classic elegance, and had helped Marcus navigate the competitive world of luxury hospitality. Together, they'd built an impressive lifestyle around the estate. Marcus drove a $90,000 BMW, Catherine had her Mercedes SUV, and their teenage twin daughters Amelia and Charlotte attended one of Marin County's most exclusive private schools. They entertained friends at elaborate dinner parties, took expensive vacations to Europe and Asia, and generally lived like the wealthy estate owners they believed themselves to be. But what they didn't understand was that legally, I owned 100% of everything they were enjoying. The estate, the business, the income, even the cars they drove, which were purchased through the business accounts. All of it belonged to me. Marcus was essentially a very well-compensated property manager who got to live in the main house, as part of his compensation package. For 3 years, I'd been content to let them think otherwise. The estate was being beautifully maintained, I was receiving my monthly rental income, and I was enjoying my peaceful retirement in the guest cottage. I had my own life, my own interests, my book club, my garden, and my small circle of close friends. I didn't need to be involved in the estate's operations, and I didn't need to assert my ownership as long as everyone was happy and respectful. But happiness, as I was about to discover, was a much more fragile thing than I'd realized, and respect, once lost, was almost impossible to recover. The problems started about 8 months ago, though I didn't recognize them as problems at the time. Looking back now, I can see that what I interpreted as Marcus becoming more confident and independent was actually the beginning of a calculated campaign to steal everything I'd spent a lifetime building. It began with small changes in how Marcus and Catherine talked about the estate. Instead of referring to Mom's property or the family estate, they started talking about our place and the house we're managing. When guests asked about the property's history, Marcus would say things like, "My wife and I have been developing this estate for several years," rather than mentioning that his parents had built it. It was subtle, but it reflected a fundamental shift in how they saw themselves in relation to the Whitmore estate. They were no longer managing my property. They were running their own business that happened to involve me as a silent partner. Then there were the decisions they made without consulting me. Major renovations, expensive upgrades, staffing changes, all things that technically should have involved me as the actual owner. But Marcus had been making operational decisions for 3 years, so it felt natural for him to continue doing so without asking my opinion. The first major decision I learned about after the fact was when Marcus hired a new head groundskeeper at nearly double the salary of our previous person. The new hire was excellent, but the salary increase represented a significant annual expense that affected the property's profitability. "Marcus," I said when I noticed the change in our monthly financial reports, "I see we have a new groundskeeper. The salary seems quite high." "Oh, that's Roberto," Marcus replied casually. "He used to manage the grounds at a resort in Sonoma. Catherine and I felt we needed someone with more sophisticated experience to maintain the standards our clients expect. I understand wanting quality, but that's a $35,000 annual increase in our labor costs. Shouldn't we have discussed that kind of expense?" Marcus looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of patience and mild irritation, as if I was asking about something that wasn't really my concern. "Mom, you hired me to manage the estate operations. Managing includes making staffing decisions that ensure we maintain our reputation and booking rates. If we let the grounds deteriorate, we'd lose more than $35,000 in lost bookings. Of course, but as the owner, I should be involved in major financial decisions." "You are involved. You receive the monthly reports, and you get your rental payments. But if you want me to run the business effectively, I need the authority to make operational decisions without getting approval for every expense. It was a reasonable argument, and I didn't want to micromanage someone I'd asked to handle day-to-day operations. But something about his tone bothered me. There was an underlying suggestion that my involvement in financial decisions was an inconvenience rather than a right. More concerning were the financial changes I started noticing in our quarterly reports. Marcus had hired a new accountant, a friend of Catherine's from her previous job in marketing, who had restructured some of the estate's financial arrangements. There were new expense categories that seemed designed to maximize Marcus and Catherine's compensation while minimizing the property's official profitability, management consulting fees, marketing development costs, and operational efficiency improvements. That, when I examined them closely, seemed to mostly involve payments to Marcus, Catherine, or companies they'd formed. When I asked Marcus about these changes during one of our monthly family dinners, he brushed off my questions with explanations that sounded technically accurate, but felt designed to confuse rather than clarify. "Don't worry about it, Mom," he'd say. "It's just boring. Financial optimization stuff. The new accountant is helping us maximize tax efficiency and plan for some major improvements. You're still getting your monthly payments, so there's nothing for you to be concerned about." But I'd been managing complex financial structures for 40 years. I understood boring financial optimization better than he realized, and some of the changes concerned me deeply. It looked like they were repositioning the estate's finances in ways that would make it appear less profitable on paper, while actually increasing the amount of money flowing to Marcus and Catherine personally. Even more troubling, some of the restructuring seemed designed to establish Marcus and Catherine as having made significant personal investments in the estate's improvement. There were records of loans they'd made to cover various upgrades, and equity investments they'd contributed for marketing and business development. If someone looked at the books without understanding the full context, it would appear that Marcus and Catherine had been funding the estate's growth and improvements with their own money, which could potentially give them claims to ownership beyond their management role. The situation escalated about 4 months ago when I received a call from our insurance company about changes to our liability coverage. "Mrs. Whitmore," the agent said, "I wanted to confirm the changes your son requested to the estate's insurance policies. He's added himself and his wife as additional insured parties and increased our liability coverage significantly. This will raise your annual premiums by about $12,000. "I wasn't aware of any insurance changes," I said. "What was the reason for the modifications?" He explained that they've been making substantial personal investments in the property and needed to ensure their interests were protected. He also mentioned that they were planning some major renovations that would require additional coverage. After I hung up, I immediately called Marcus. "Marcus, I just heard from our insurance company about policy changes. Why wasn't I consulted about this?" "Mom, it's just standard business practice when you have multiple parties with financial interests in a property. Catherine and I have been investing our own money into improvements and marketing, so we need to make sure we're protected if something happens." "What do you mean, you've been investing your own money?" "Well, we've been covering a lot of the marketing costs for the digital upgrades, and we paid for some of the furniture replacements in the guest suites. When you're putting your own capital into a business, you need appropriate insurance protection." "Marcus, those expenses should be coming through the estate's accounts, not your personal funds. Why are you paying for property improvements with your own money?" "Because it was easier and faster than going through the formal expense approval process. But now our accountant is recommending that we formalize these investments for tax and liability purposes." That conversation set off alarm bells in my mind. It sounded like Marcus and Catherine were creating a paper trail that would support claims to partial ownership of the estate based on their investments in its improvement. I decided I needed to understand exactly what was happening with the estate's finances, so I requested copies of all financial records, expense reports, and contracts from the past year. Marcus's response to that request was illuminating. "Mom, Why do you suddenly need all this detailed financial information? You've never asked for comprehensive records before. Because I'm starting to have concerns about some of the changes I'm seeing, and as the owner, I have the right to review all business documents. Of course you have the right, but I'm wondering if this is the best use of your time and energy. You've been enjoying your retirement, spending time with your friends, working in your garden. Do you really want to get bogged down in complicated business paperwork? Marcus, managing finances isn't complicated for me. I built this business empire, remember? You and Dad built it together years ago. But the estate management business today is much more complex than what you dealt with back then. Technology, marketing, liability issues, regulatory compliance, it's basically a completely different industry. I think I can manage to understand expense reports and contracts. I'm sure you can, but why stress yourself with details when everything is running smoothly? Your monthly payments are consistent, the property is thriving, and Catherine and I are handling all the day-to-day headaches. Isn't that exactly what you wanted when you asked me to take over management? Again, it was a reasonable argument on the surface, but the underlying message was clear. I was too old and out of touch to understand modern business operations, and my desire to review financial records was an unnecessary intrusion into Marcus's management authority. But I persisted, and after some back and forth, Marcus agreed to provide the records I'd requested. What I found when I reviewed those documents was deeply disturbing. Over the past 18 months, Marcus and Catherine had systematically restructured the estate's operations in ways that positioned them as essential business partners rather than employees. They'd created multiple new expense categories that funneled money to them personally. They'd established consulting agreements with companies they controlled, and they'd documented numerous investments they'd supposedly made in the property's improvement. Most concerning was a series of contracts with something called Marin Luxury Management LLC, a company that, when I researched it, turned out to be owned by Marcus and Catherine. The estate was paying this company substantial monthly fees for strategic consulting, marketing coordination, and operational optimization. Essentially, Marcus and Catherine had created their own company and then hired that company to provide services to my estate, allowing them to extract money beyond their management fees while making it appear that they were providing additional value through their external business. They'd also signed contracts with several vendors and service providers that included unusual clauses giving Marcus and Catherine personal guarantees and liability protections that went well beyond what would be normal for property managers. When I called our attorney, Patricia Stevens, to review these documents, her assessment was immediate and alarming. "Eleanor," she said after reviewing the contracts, "your son and daughter-in-law appear to be positioning themselves to make ownership claims on your property. These financial arrangements, the insurance changes, the vendor contracts, they're building a case that they've become essential business partners who have made substantial investments in the estate's success. Can they do that legally? It's complicated. Legally, you own the property outright, and their management agreement doesn't give them any ownership rights. But if they can demonstrate that they've made substantial personal investments in the property's improvement, and if they can show that the current success of the business is primarily due to their efforts and capital, they might be able to argue for some form of equity stake. Even though I never agreed to give them ownership? Eleanor, property law can be murky when multiple parties have been involved in developing and improving a business over several years. The fact that you've allowed them to make these financial arrangements without objection could be interpreted as implicit approval of their increasing role. What should I do? First, you need to have a direct conversation with Marcus about these arrangements and make it clear that you don't approve of the financial restructuring. Second, you should consider whether you want to continue with this management arrangement at all, or whether you'd prefer to resume direct control of the estate, and if I want to remove them from management. You have the legal right to do that, but it could be complicated if they resist. They might claim that removing them would damage the business they've built, or that they're entitled to compensation for their investments. That conversation with Patricia clarified something important. Marcus and Catherine weren't just taking advantage of my trust. They were actively working to steal my property through financial manipulation and legal maneuvering. But before I could decide how to respond, Marcus forced the issue by calling a family meeting to discuss the future of the estate. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon 3 weeks ago. Marcus said he wanted to discuss some exciting opportunities for expanding the estate's business and modernizing our operations. Catherine would be presenting some ideas about marketing and brand development, and they had some financial projections they wanted to share with me. I should have realized it was an ambush, but I was still hoping we could resolve our differences through honest communication. Marcus picked me up from the guest cottage in his BMW, as he often did for our family meetings. But instead of going to the main house as usual, he drove to a restaurant in Sausalito that overlooked the bay. I thought it would be nice to meet somewhere neutral, he explained, where we can focus on business planning without the distractions of the estate. The restaurant was expensive and exclusive, the kind of place where Marcus and Catherine often entertained their wealthy clients. We were seated at a private table with spectacular views, and the atmosphere seemed designed to emphasize the sophisticated lifestyle that Marcus believed he'd created for himself. Catherine arrived a few minutes later, carrying a leather portfolio, and looking like she was about to make a presentation to potential investors. "Eleanor," she said, giving me a brief hug. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. We're really excited to share our vision for the estate's future." The lunch started pleasantly enough. Marcus and Catherine talked enthusiastically about the estate's recent successes, the high-profile clients they'd attracted, and the positive reviews they'd received from luxury travel publications. The property was performing better than ever, they said, and they had ambitious plans for further growth. But then the conversation shifted. "Mom," Marcus said, "we need to talk seriously about the estate's ownership structure and management arrangements." "What do you mean?" Catherine leaned forward, her voice taking on a gentle but firm tone. "Eleanor, we've been thinking about this for months, and we believe the current arrangement isn't sustainable for the long term." "In what way?" "Well," Marcus continued, "the business has grown significantly since I took over management. We're generating much higher revenues, we've attracted a more sophisticated clientele, and we've invested substantial personal resources into building the brand and improving the operations. That's wonderful. I'm proud of what you've accomplished. But the problem," Catherine said, "is that the current ownership structure doesn't reflect the reality of who's actually running the business and who's been investing in its growth." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" Marcus pulled out a folder and spread several documents across the table. "Mom, over the past 3 years, Catherine and I have invested over $200,000 of our own money into improving the estate and building the business. We've also committed our full-time efforts to making it successful, and we've taken significant personal risks to expand the operation." "What kind of risks?" "Financial guarantees for vendor contracts, personal liability for event insurance, professional. Reputation stakes if something goes wrong," Catherine explained. "When you're running a luxury hospitality business, your personal credibility is on the line with every event." "But that's what we pay you management fees for," I said. "Mom, the management fees we receive are reasonable compensation for our time, but they don't reflect the equity stake we've earned through our investments and the value we've created," Marcus said. "Equity stake?" Catherine opened her portfolio and pulled out several financial reports. "Eleanor, when we started managing the estate 3 years ago, it was generating about $300,000 in annual net income. Last year, we generated over $750,000. We've more than doubled the profitability of the business. That's impressive, but the increased profitability belongs to the estate, which I own." "But Mom," Marcus said, "the increased profitability is directly due to our efforts, our investments, and our expertise. Without our management, the estate would still be generating a third of what it makes now." And our point, Catherine continued, is that the current ownership structure doesn't provide us with appropriate compensation for the value we've created, or security for the investments we've made. I was beginning to understand where this conversation was heading, and I didn't like it at all. What exactly are you proposing? Marcus glanced at Catherine, then looked directly at me. We think it's time to formalize our partnership in a way that reflects our actual contributions to the business. What does that mean? We're proposing to restructure the ownership so that you retain 51% of the estate, while Catherine and I receive 49% in recognition of our investments and management contributions. I sat back in my chair, genuinely shocked by what I was hearing. You want me to give you nearly half of my property? We want you to recognize the reality of our partnership, Catherine said. We've been operating as business partners for 3 years, making investments, taking risks, and building value together. The ownership structure should reflect that partnership. But you're not my business partners, I said. You're my employees. I hired you to manage the estate, not to become my partners. Marcus's expression hardened. Mom, that's not fair, and it's not accurate. We haven't been operating as employees. We've been making strategic decisions, investing our own capital, and building a business that's much more successful than what existed before. You've been doing that as my managers, using my property and my resources. Using our expertise and our money to create value that didn't exist before, Catherine corrected. Eleanor, you haven't been involved in any of the day-to-day decisions that have made the estate successful. You've been enjoying your retirement while we've been building a business. Building a business with my property as the foundation. But property without proper management is just expensive real estate, Marcus said. We've turned your real estate into a thriving business. That's worth something. The argument continued for over an hour, with Marcus and Catherine presenting financial projections, investment summaries, and comparisons to other luxury hospitality businesses to support their claim that they deserved ownership stakes in the estate. Their basic argument was that they'd transformed my property into something much more valuable than it had been before, and that their contributions entitled them to share in that increased value. My position was that they'd been well compensated for their management services, and that any improvements they'd made were part of their job responsibilities, not grounds, for ownership claims. Look, Marcus said finally, we can argue about this all day, but the reality is that we need to resolve this ownership question if we want the business to continue growing. Why? Because we have opportunities for major expansion that require clear ownership structures, Catherine explained. We've been approached by several potential investors who are interested in helping us develop additional luxury properties throughout Northern California. What kind of investors? Hospitality development groups, real estate investment funds, wealthy individuals who want to partner with successful luxury brands, Marcus said. We're talking about potentially developing 4 or 5 additional estates over the next decade. But they won't work with us unless they understand exactly who owns what and who has the authority to make major business decisions, Catherine added. So you're saying that if I don't give you ownership stakes, you can't expand the business? We're saying that uncertainty about ownership prevents us from pursuing opportunities that could make all of us much wealthier, Marcus said. What if I agreed to formalize your management authority without giving up ownership? We could restructure the management agreement to give you clear decision-making power while I retain ownership. Marcus shook his head. The investors won't accept that kind of arrangement. They want to work with owners who have both legal control and operational responsibility. Splitting those responsibilities between family members is exactly the kind of situation sophisticated investors try to avoid. So my choices are to give you ownership stakes or watch the business stagnate. Mom, that's not how we want you to think about this, Catherine said. We want you to think about this as an opportunity to formalize a partnership that's already been working successfully for 3 years, and to benefit from expansion opportunities that could significantly increase the value of your 51% stake, Marcus added. We talked for another hour, going through various scenarios and financial projections. Marcus and Catherine had clearly prepared extensively for this conversation, and they had answers for every objection I raised. But by the end of the lunch, I was more convinced than ever that what they were proposing was fundamentally wrong. They were asking me to give up nearly half of my life's work based on their claim that they'd improved its value that had been created using my property, my reputation, and my financial resources. I need time to think about this and discuss it with my attorney, I said finally. Of course, Marcus said. But Mom, I hope you'll keep in mind that these expansion opportunities won't wait indefinitely. The investors we're talking to have other projects they're considering. How much time are we talking about? We need to give them an answer within 2 weeks, or they'll move on to other opportunities, Catherine said. 2 weeks? That's not very long for such a major decision. It's the reality of business, Mom, Marcus said. Good opportunities don't wait for our convenience. As Marcus drove me back to the estate, I felt like I was seeing him clearly for the first time in years. The son I'd raised and trusted had become someone who was willing to manipulate and pressure me into giving up my property. But what I didn't realize was that the manipulation had only just begun. And the real shock, the moment that would change, everything between us forever, was still 2 weeks away. Over the next week, the pressure campaign intensified in ways that were both subtle and relentless. Marcus began dropping comments about the estate's finances that were designed to make me worry about its future without his management. He'd mention expensive repairs. That would be needed soon. Regulatory changes that could affect our operations, and competitive pressures from other luxury properties in the area. Mom, he said during one of our conversations, I've been thinking about what happens if we don't move forward with the ownership restructuring. Without access to expansion capital, we'll probably need to start cutting expenses to maintain profitability. What kind of expense cuts? Well, we might need to reduce staff, postpone some of the maintenance upgrades, maybe scale back some of the marketing that's been driving our bookings. That sounds like it would hurt the business. It would. But if we can't access growth capital through investor partnerships, we'll have to manage decline instead of growth. Catherine took a different approach, focusing on emotional appeals about family unity and shared success. Eleanor, she said during a visit to the guest cottage, I hope you know that Marcus and I aren't trying to take anything away from you. We're trying to build something bigger that benefits all of us. I understand that you have good intentions. We really do. And we want you to be proud of what we've accomplished together. The estate has become something really special under our management, and we want to make sure it continues to thrive for generations. But why does that require giving you ownership? Because that's how modern business partnerships work. People who contribute capital and expertise expect to have equity stakes that reflect their contributions. Without that, we can't attract the kind of sophisticated partners we need for major expansion. Both Marcus and Catherine also began making subtle suggestions about my age and capability that were designed to undermine my confidence in my own judgment. Mom, I know this is a lot to think about, Marcus said one evening. Business decisions like this are complex even for people who are actively involved in day-to-day operations. Since you've been out of the business world for several years, it might be helpful to focus on the big picture rather than getting lost in technical details. I'm perfectly capable of understanding business details, Marcus. Of course you are. I just meant that you shouldn't feel like you need to master every aspect of modern hospitality management to make a good decision about our partnership proposal. The implication was clear. I was too old and out of touch to fully understand what Marcus and Catherine were proposing, so I should trust their expertise and accept their recommendations. But the most troubling development was what happened when I tried to get independent advice about their proposal. When I called Patricia Stevens to schedule a meeting to review Marcus and Catherine's partnership proposal, I discovered that she was no longer available to represent me. Mrs. Whitmore, her assistant explained, Ms. Stevens has a conflict of interest that prevents her from advising you on this matter. What kind of conflict? I'm not able to discuss the details, but she wanted me to recommend several other attorneys who specialize in family business disputes. After some investigation, I learned that Marcus and Catherine had consulted with Patricia about their rights and options regarding the estate, creating a conflict that prevented her from also representing me. They'd effectively neutralized my longtime attorney just when I needed her advice most. When I confronted Marcus about this, his response was revealing. "Mom, we weren't trying to create problems for you. We just wanted to understand our legal position before proposing the partnership restructuring. Any good attorney would have advised us to get independent legal counsel. But now I can't use Patricia, and she knows all the details of our family's legal arrangements. You can hire another attorney. There are plenty of excellent lawyers who specialize in family business issues." Marcus, it seems like you're deliberately making this process more difficult for me. That's not our intention at all. We're just trying to make sure everyone's interests are properly protected. But finding a new attorney and bringing them up to speed on 30 years of complex business arrangements would take weeks, time that Marcus and Catherine had made clear I didn't have. By the end of that week, I was feeling isolated, pressured, and increasingly convinced that Marcus and Catherine were actively working against my interests rather than with them. That's when I made a decision that would prove to be crucial. I was going to decline their partnership proposal and assert my authority as the estate's owner. But before I could have that conversation with Marcus, he called with what he said was an urgent matter that required immediate attention. "Mom," he said, "we have a situation with one of our major clients, and I need your help. Can we meet tomorrow to discuss it?" "What kind of situation?" "It's complicated. I'd rather explain it in person. Can I pick you up tomorrow afternoon? We might need to drive out to look at one of our other properties." I agreed, thinking we were going to address a legitimate business issue. I had no idea I was about to experience the most shocking betrayal of my life. A betrayal that would take place not in a conference room or lawyer's office, but on the gravel, driveway of my own estate, with me sprawled on the ground and my son driving away without even checking to see if I was hurt. But that moment, the moment that would change everything, was still 24 hours away. And when it happened, it would remove any doubt I had about who Marcus and Catherine really were and what they were really trying to do to me. That moment, the moment that would change everything, came on a Tuesday afternoon that started like any other day in my quiet retirement routine. I was in the guest cottage, having my usual lunch of soup and salad while reading the San Francisco Chronicle when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus's number, which wasn't unusual. He typically called me a couple times a week to discuss estate business or make plans for our family dinners. "Hi, Mom." His voice sounded urgent in a way that immediately put me on alert. "I hope I'm not interrupting your lunch." "Of course not. Sweetheart, what's going on? You sound stressed." "Actually, Mom, we have a significant situation that I need your help with, and it's fairly time-sensitive." "What kind of situation?" "It's about the Sonoma property. You remember the luxury ranch we've been managing for the Henderson family?" I did remember. It was one of the properties that had been part of our hospitality portfolio for over 15 years, though we'd sold our ownership stake to the Henderson family 5 years ago while retaining management responsibilities. "Of course. What's wrong?" "They're having serious financial problems and they're considering selling the property. But here's the thing. They've offered to sell it back to us first, at a significant discount from market value." "How significant?" "They're asking $2.8 million for a property that's probably worth $4 million in the current market. It's an incredible opportunity, but we'd need to move quickly because they have other interested buyers." "Marcus, that's a lot of money. Even at a discount, we'd need substantial financing to purchase a property like that. That's why I need to talk to you in person. I've been working with some financial advisors about structuring the purchase. And there are some options that could work really well for our family, but I need to explain the details and get your input." Can't we discuss it over the phone? Not really. There are documents I need to show you. Financial projections, property inspections reports. It's too complex for a phone conversation. All right. When did you want to meet? Actually, could we do it this afternoon? I know it's short notice, but the Hendersons need an answer by tomorrow morning, and I want to make sure we have enough time to review everything properly. I hesitated. Something about the urgency felt familiar and uncomfortable, reminiscent of the pressure tactics Marcus and Catherine had been using over the past 2 weeks. Marcus, this feels rushed. If it's such a good opportunity, why can't we take a few days to review it properly? Because the Hendersons are in a financial crisis and they need to close quickly. They've already had interest from a development company that wants to subdivide the land for housing. If we don't give them an answer tomorrow, they'll probably accept the developer's offer. And losing the property to development would be bad because it would eliminate one of the premier luxury hospitality properties in Sonoma County. And because it represents exactly the kind of expansion opportunity we've been talking about for the estate business. I felt that familiar chill of being pressured into making a major decision without adequate time to consider it properly. Marcus, I thought we agreed to put expansion plans on hold until we resolved the ownership structure questions. Mom, this isn't really expansion. This is preservation. We're talking about saving a property that's been part of our hospitality network for 15 years. But purchasing it would require a major financial commitment that I'm not sure I'm ready to make. That's why I need to show you the financial projections. I think you'll be surprised by how manageable the purchase could be, especially if we structure it properly. After some back and forth, I agreed to meet with him that afternoon, but I insisted that we meet at the estate rather than driving to some remote location. Actually, Mom, I was hoping we could drive out to look at the Sonoma property itself. It's important for you to see the current condition and understand what we'd be purchasing. Marcus, I'm familiar with the Henderson Ranch. I don't need to inspect it. But you haven't been there in over 2 years. There have been significant improvements, and there are also some maintenance issues that would affect our purchase decision. How long would this trip take? Maybe 3 hours total. We could drive out, spend an hour looking at the property, and reviewing the financials, then drive back. I could have you home by 6 o'clock. I was reluctant to spend 3 hours in a car reviewing a business opportunity that I was already skeptical about, but Marcus seemed genuinely concerned about the time pressure, and I didn't want to dismiss a potentially legitimate opportunity without proper consideration. All right. What time should we leave? Could we go around 2 p.m.? That would give us enough time to review everything thoroughly and still get back before dinner. Fine. I'll be ready at 2. Thanks, Mom. I really appreciate your willingness to consider this opportunity. I think it could be a great addition to our portfolio. After he hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at my phone and trying to shake the uneasy feeling that something about the conversation hadn't felt right. Maybe it was the urgency, another major business decision that supposedly required immediate action. Maybe it was the way Marcus had dismissed my suggestion that we meet at the estate. Or maybe it was the fact that this opportunity had emerged just 2 weeks after Marcus and Catherine had pressured me to give up nearly half my ownership of the Whitmore estate. But I also knew that unexpected opportunities were a normal part of the real estate and hospitality business. And Marcus was my son. If he was asking for my help with a legitimate business decision, of course I wanted to support him. At 2 p.m., I was waiting on the guest cottage porch when Marcus pulled up in his BMW. I gathered my purse and walking cane and headed toward the car. But something felt different about his demeanor. Instead of getting out to help me with the door as he usually did, he remained in the driver's seat and gave me a brief wave. I made my way to the passenger side and opened the door. Marcus was on his phone, having what sounded like an intense conversation. "No, that's not acceptable," he was saying. "We discussed this timeline weeks ago, and now you're telling me there are additional requirements?" I settled into the passenger seat and waited for him to finish his call. But the conversation continued for several more minutes. From what I could overhear, It sounded like he was dealing with some kind of contractor or vendor dispute. Finally, he ended the call and turned to me with an expression of frustration. "Sorry about that, Mom. We're dealing with some complicated vendor issues for the estate's winter maintenance. Is everything all right?" "It will be, just the usual challenges of managing multiple properties and keeping all the contractors on schedule." He started the car and we began driving toward the estate's main entrance. But instead of turning left toward the highway that would take us to Sonoma, Marcus turned right and drove deeper into the estate grounds. "Marcus, where are we going? This isn't the way to Sonoma." "I want to show you something first. There's been some damage to the back vineyard area that I want you to see before we discuss the Henderson property purchase." "What kind of damage?" "Some erosion issues from the winter storms. It's going to require significant restoration work that could affect our budget for other investments." We drove along the estate's private road toward the vineyard and event areas that were furthest from both the main house and my guest cottage. This part of the property was beautiful but isolated, surrounded by hills and trees that blocked the view from the main buildings. Marcus parked near a grove of oak trees and got out of the car. I remained in the passenger seat, since he hadn't indicated that I needed to get out to see whatever damage he wanted to show me. But then Marcus walked around to my side of the car and opened the passenger door. "You need to see this erosion damage, up close to understand how extensive it is," he said. I reluctantly got out of the car, using my cane for stability on the uneven ground. Marcus led me toward what appeared to be a small slope, where winter rains had indeed created some erosion. "See how the water has carved away the soil here?" he said, pointing to an area where the ground had been washed out. "The whole hillside could become unstable if we don't address this soon." I examined the erosion, which looked like normal wear from seasonal weather rather than anything catastrophic. "It looks manageable," I said, "probably a few $1,000s for proper drainage and regrading." The contractor estimates closer to $30,000 for a permanent solution. That seems excessive for this amount of damage. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then said, "Mom, we need to talk about more than just erosion repairs." Something in his tone made me turn to look at him directly. His expression had changed from frustrated to something colder and more determined. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we need to talk about the partnership proposal Catherine and I made 2 weeks ago, and your response to it." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the afternoon breeze. "Marcus, I thought we were here to discuss the Henderson property opportunity." "There is no Henderson property opportunity, Mom. The Hendersons aren't selling their ranch." "What?" "I made that up to get you out here where we could have a private conversation without interruptions." I stared at him in shock. "You lied to me?" "I needed to talk to you away from the estate, away from your phone, away from any distractions. This conversation is too important for interruptions. Marcus, I want to go home. Right now. In a few minutes. First, we need to resolve this ownership situation." "There's nothing to resolve. I've decided not to accept your partnership proposal." "Mom, that's not going to work." "What do you mean it's not going to work? It's my estate. I can make whatever decisions I want about ownership." Marcus walked a few steps away from me, then turned back with an expression I'd never seen before. "Mom, you need to understand something. Catherine and I aren't asking for your permission to become partners in the estate business. We're informing you that we already are partners, and we need you to acknowledge that reality." "That's not true. I own the estate outright. You own the property, but Catherine and I own the business. We've built the client relationships. We've created the systems and procedures. We've invested our money and reputation into making it successful. Without us, you have expensive real estate with no income. I can hire other managers. No, you can't. The business relationships, the vendor contracts, the client connections, they're all tied to Catherine and me personally. If we leave, the business dies." I was beginning to understand that this wasn't a negotiation. It was a threat. Are you telling me that if I don't give you ownership stakes, you'll quit and try to destroy the business? I'm telling you that if you don't recognize our partnership, we'll be forced to start our own competing business using all the relationships and expertise we've developed. You can't do that. You have a non-compete agreement. Marcus smiled in a way that made my blood run cold. Mom, non-compete agreements are very difficult to enforce when former employees can demonstrate that they were treated unfairly or that their contributions weren't properly recognized. Marcus, what you're describing is extortion. What I'm describing is business reality. You hired us to manage the estate, and we've made it more successful than you ever could have imagined. Now we deserve to be compensated appropriately for that success. You are being compensated. You receive substantial management fees. Management fees are payment for services. We're talking about equity compensation for value creation. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Marcus making increasingly aggressive arguments about why he and Catherine deserved ownership stakes in the estate. But his underlying message was clear. Give us what we want, or we'll destroy what you have. I was standing in an isolated part of my own property, being threatened by my own son, and beginning to realize that the family I thought I had was gone. Forever. Marcus, I want to go home now. Mom, you're not listening to what I'm trying to tell you. I'm listening perfectly well. You're trying to steal my property by threatening to destroy it if I don't cooperate. I'm trying to save your property by offering you a partnership with the people who actually know how to run it successfully. Take me home, Marcus. This conversation is over. Marcus stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head. Fine. But Mom, you need to understand that this offer won't be available indefinitely. Catherine and I have other options if you're not willing to be reasonable. We walked back to the car in tense silence. I was shaken by the conversation, but relieved that it was over, and that we could return to the guest cottage where I could think about what had just happened. But as we reached the car, Marcus's phone rang. He answered it with a curt, "Hello," and immediately launched into what sounded like an angry conversation. What do you mean they're threatening to cancel? We've had that contract for 3 months. No, that's completely unacceptable. Look, I'll deal with this myself. Don't agree to anything until I get there. He hung up and turned to me with an expression of extreme frustration. Mom, I have to deal with an emergency situation. One of our major event clients is threatening to cancel their contract because of some miscommunication with our catering coordinator. Can't it wait until we get back to the estate? No, it can't. This is a $75,000 event that could turn into a lawsuit if I don't handle it immediately. I need to drive to San Francisco right now. Then drop me off at the cottage first. Mom, I don't have time. The meeting is in 45 minutes and it'll take me an hour to get there from here. Marcus, you can't just leave me here. I don't have a way to get back to the cottage. You can walk. It's less than a mile through the vineyard path. I stared at him in disbelief. Marcus, I'm 70 years old and I use a cane. I can't walk a mile on uneven ground. Mom, this is an emergency. I'll be back in 3 hours to pick you up. 3 hours? I'm not waiting 3 hours in the middle of a vineyard? Then call someone to come get you. My phone doesn't get good reception out here. Marcus looked genuinely torn between his supposed emergency and leaving me stranded. But after a moment, his expression hardened with decision. Mom, I'm sorry, but I have to handle this crisis. You'll be fine. Worst case, you can walk slowly and rest along the way. Marcus, you cannot leave me here. But he was already getting back into the driver's seat. I'll try to get back as soon as possible, he said through the open car door, and then he started the engine. I was standing next to the passenger door, leaning on my cane, when I realized he was actually planning to drive away and leave me alone. In the middle of the estate property. Marcus, wait! I reached for the passenger door handle, trying to get back into the car, but Marcus had already started to drive forward. The door was still open, and I was trying to get in, when the car lurched ahead more quickly than I'd expected. I lost my balance, my cane went flying, and I fell hard onto the gravel, scraping my hands and jarring my hip as I hit the ground. Looked up to see Marcus's BMW driving away, the passenger door swinging shut as he accelerated down the estate road. He didn't stop. He didn't look back. He didn't even slow down to see if I was hurt. I lay there on the gravel for several minutes, stunned by what had just happened. My son had lured me to an isolated location under false pretenses, threatened me when I wouldn't give him my property, and then literally drove away while I was trying to get into his car, leaving me injured and stranded. When I finally managed to get to my feet and retrieve my cane, I stood alone in the vineyard, looking at the dust cloud from Marcus's car disappearing toward the estate's main road. That's when I realized that the son I'd raised and loved and trusted was gone. In his place was someone who saw me not as his mother, but as an obstacle to getting what he wanted. Someone who was willing to physically abandon me to get his way. Someone who had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Because what Marcus didn't understand, as he drove away feeling satisfied with his power play, was that I wasn't just some helpless old woman he could intimidate and manipulate. Was a woman who had spent 40 years learning how to fight for what was mine, and I was about to teach him exactly what happened when you underestimated someone who had nothing left to lose. But first, I had to get home. The walk back to the guest cottage took me almost 2 hours. The vineyard path was uneven and difficult to navigate with a cane, especially after the jarring fall that had left my hip aching and my hands scraped raw. I had to stop and rest every few hundred yards, sitting on stone walls or leaning against fence posts while I caught my breath and gathered the strength to continue. During that slow, painful walk, I had plenty of time to think about what had just happened and what it meant for my relationship with Marcus and Catherine. This wasn't just a family disagreement that had gotten out of hand. This was a calculated act of cruelty designed to break my spirit and force me into submission. Marcus had lied to get me to an isolated location, threatened me when I refused to cooperate, and then abandoned me when his threats didn't work. He'd counted on me being too old, too fragile, and too dependent to fight back effectively. He was wrong on all 3 counts. By the time I reached the guest cottage, it was nearly 6 p.m. I was exhausted, sore, and emotionally devastated. But I was also more determined than I'd ever been in my life. I wasn't going to be a victim of my son's greed and manipulation. I was going to fight back with every resource at my disposal, and I was going to win. I spent that evening on the phone, making calls that would change everything. The first call was to a locksmith, asking them to come out first thing in the morning to change all the locks on the estate property, including the main house, guest cottage, and all outbuildings. The second call was to the estate's security company, instructing them to remove Marcus and Catherine's access codes and to install additional security cameras covering all entrances to the property. The third call was to a new attorney, someone Marcus and Catherine had never met and couldn't influence. But the most important call was to someone Marcus had never paid attention to, someone he'd probably forgotten even existed, someone who was about to become the most important person in this whole story. "Maria?" I said when she answered her phone. "It's Eleanor. I know it's late, but I need to ask you something important. Is your daughter Isabella still in law school?" Maria Gonzalez had been my housekeeper for 12 years. She was intelligent, hardworking, and absolutely devoted to her daughter Isabella, who was in her final year at Stanford Law School. Isabella had grown up helping her mother clean houses and working multiple part-time jobs to pay for her education. "Yes, Mrs. Whitmore. She graduates in June. Why do you ask?" "Because I want to offer her something that could change her life forever." "What do you mean?" "Maria, I want to offer Isabella a full partnership in the Whitmore estate. Not just a job, actual ownership. If she's willing to help me with a legal matter, I'm prepared to give her half of everything I own." The silence on the other end of the line was so long that I thought the call had dropped. "Mrs. Whitmore," Maria said finally, "I don't understand." "I'll explain everything tomorrow. But Maria, I want you to know that your daughter has worked harder and shown more integrity than most people I've known. She deserves opportunities that her background hasn't provided, and I'm in a position to give her those opportunities. Why would you do this? Because Isabella has earned it, and because I need an ally I can trust completely." "Mrs. Whitmore, are you all right? You sound upset." "I'm fine, Maria. But Marcus and Catherine have shown me who they really are, and I need to protect myself and my property from people who are trying to steal what I've spent a lifetime building." We talked for another 20 minutes, with me explaining some of what had happened and what I was planning to do about it. Maria was shocked by Marcus's behavior, but not entirely surprised. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, "I've seen how they talk about you when they think no one is listening. They don't speak about you with respect." "What do you mean?" "They talk about you like you're a burden they have to manage, rather than the owner of the property. Senora Catherine especially, she talks about the house like it belongs to her. Have you seen them going through my personal papers or financial documents?" "Yes, many times. They've asked me to clean Senor Marcus's office when he's not there, and I've seen your business papers on his desk." "Maria, would you and Isabella be willing to help me make sure that Marcus and Catherine can never steal my property?" "Mrs. Whitmore, after what they did to you today, we would do anything to help you." That conversation gave me hope for the first time since Marcus had driven away and left me sprawled on the gravel. But it also marked the beginning of the most intense legal and financial battle of my life. A battle that would ultimately cost Marcus and Catherine everything they thought they'd gained, and would give Isabella Gonzalez opportunities beyond anything she'd ever imagined. Over the next 48 hours, I put into motion a plan that would completely reverse the power dynamic between Marcus, Catherine, and me. Step 1 was securing the property. The locksmith arrived at 7 a.m. the next morning and changed every lock on the estate. The security company arrived at 9 a.m. and updated all the access codes while installing additional cameras. Step 2 was securing my legal position. My new attorney, James Morrison, came to the guest cottage at 11 a.m. with a team of paralegals to review all the estate's financial and legal documents. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said after reviewing the ownership papers, "you have an absolutely clear legal title to this property. Your son and daughter-in-law have no ownership rights whatsoever." "But what about all the financial restructuring they've done? The investments they claim to have made? They've created some paperwork that might complicate things in court, but fundamentally, they're employees who have exceeded their authority. Everything they've done can be reversed." "What about their threats to start a competing business?" Non-compete agreements are enforceable in California under these circumstances. If they try to compete using relationships and knowledge gained, while managing your property, we can stop them. Step 3 was the most important, bringing Isabella into the plan. Isabella Gonzalez arrived at the estate that afternoon with her mother. She was 24 years old, about to graduate from Stanford Law, and one of the most impressive young people I'd ever met. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, "my mother told me what happened yesterday. I'm so sorry that Mr. Marcus treated you that way. Isabella, I want to offer you something, but I need you to understand that accepting it will change your life completely." I explained my proposal. Isabella would become my full business partner, with 50% ownership of the Whitmore estate and all associated businesses. In exchange, she would help me manage the legal aspects of removing Marcus and Catherine from their positions and protecting the estate from their attempts to claim ownership. "Mrs. Whitmore, I don't understand why you would do this for me." "Because you've earned it, Isabella. You've worked harder than anyone I know. You've supported your family while excelling in school. You've shown integrity and determination that most people never develop. But I don't know anything about running a luxury estate. You can learn, And more importantly, I can teach you. The legal knowledge you're gaining in law school, combined with the work ethic you've demonstrated your entire life, makes you exactly the kind of partner I need. Isabella looked at her mother, then back at me. Mrs. Whitmore, if I accept this partnership, what happens to Senor Marcus and Senora Catherine? They'll be removed from their management positions and banned from the property. They'll have to find other work and other places to live. And their children? That's not my responsibility, Isabella. Marcus and Catherine made choices that had consequences. I'm not obligated to protect them from those consequences. Isabella was quiet for a long moment. Mrs. Whitmore, if you're serious about this offer, then yes. I'll help you protect what you've built. That handshake marked the beginning of a partnership that would transform both of our lives. But it also marked the beginning of the end for Marcus and Catherine's dreams of stealing my estate. Because what they didn't know, as they continued to live in my main house and plan their next moves, was that they no longer had access to the property, the accounts, or the legal protections they thought they controlled. And they were about to discover that the 70-year-old woman they'd abandoned on a gravel road was far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. The reckoning was coming, and it was going to be swift, decisive, and absolutely devastating to everything they thought they'd built. The reckoning came sooner than I expected. At 7:30 a.m. the next morning, I was having coffee with Isabella and Maria in the guest cottage, reviewing the legal documents that would formalize our new partnership, when we heard the sound of a car pulling up to the main house. Through the cottage window, I watched Marcus get out of his BMW and walk toward the front door of what he still believed was his house. He moved with the confident stride of someone who had no idea his entire world was about to collapse. Isabella looked up from the partnership agreement she'd been studying. Should we wait to see what happens? No, I said, setting down my coffee cup. Let's go show Marcus exactly what happens when you underestimate a 70-year-old woman who spent 40 years protecting what's hers. We walked across the estate grounds, toward the main house, with Maria carrying a folder of documents and Isabella carrying her laptop bag. I felt calmer than I had in weeks, knowing that everything was now documented, legally protected, and completely under my control. When we reached the front door, I could hear Marcus inside, apparently talking on his phone about some business matter. His voice carried the casual authority of someone who believed he owned the place he was standing in. I rang the doorbell. After a moment, Marcus opened the door with an expression of mild surprise. Oh, hi, Mom. I didn't expect to see you this early. Listen, I'm sorry about yesterday. The client emergency turned out to be more complicated than I thought, and by the time I could get back to pick you up, it was dark. I figured you'd already found your own way home. He was treating yesterday's abandonment as a minor inconvenience rather than a shocking betrayal. No acknowledgement that he'd left me injured and stranded. No concern about whether I'd been hurt. No apology for the emotional cruelty of what he'd done. Marcus, I said calmly, we need to talk. Of course. Come in, come in. He stepped aside, then noticed Isabella and Maria. Oh, hello, Maria. And this must be your daughter. Congratulations on law school graduation. Thank you, Isabella said, politely. Marcus led us into the main living room, the beautiful space that Charles had designed for entertaining and that I'd paid for with 40 years of hard work. Marcus settled into one of the leather chairs with the casual ownership of someone who belonged there. So, he said, what did you want to talk about? If this is about the partnership proposal, I hope you've had time to think it over and reconsider. Actually, Marcus, I have reconsidered, and I've made some decisions. That's great, Mom. I was hoping you'd realize that our proposal really is the best solution for everyone. My decision, I continued, is that you and Catherine are terminated from all management positions with the Whitmore estate, effective immediately. Marcus stared at me for a moment, then laughed. Mom, you can't be serious. I'm completely serious. You're fired, Marcus. Both of you. Mom, we've been through this. You can't run this estate without us. We have all the client relationships, all the vendor contracts, all the operational knowledge. Without us, you have expensive real estate with no income. Isabella opened her laptop and pulled out several documents. Actually, Mr. Whitmore, she said, that's not accurate. I've spent the past 18 hours reviewing all the estate's contracts and business relationships. Most of the vendor agreements are with the estate entity, not with you personally. The client relationships are documented and transferable, and the operational procedures are well documented in the files your mother has maintained for years. Marcus looked at Isabella with the condescending expression he might use for a child who had interrupted an adult conversation. I'm sorry, but who are you to be reviewing estate business documents? I'm Isabella Gonzalez, and as of this morning, I'm your mother's business partner and co-owner of the Whitmore estate. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. What? Marcus said finally. I've transferred 50% ownership of the estate to Isabella, I explained. She's now my equal partner in all business. Operations! Marcus stood up abruptly, his face flushing with anger. That's impossible. You can't just give away half of a multi-million-dollar property. Actually, I can, Isabella said, pulling out the legal documents. As the sole owner of the property, Mrs. Whitmore has the absolute right to transfer ownership to anyone she chooses. The partnership agreement was filed with the county this morning. This is insane! Marcus turned to me with an expression of fury I'd never seen before. Mom, you're giving away half of our family estate to the housekeeper's daughter? I'm giving half of my estate to someone who's earned it through hard work, integrity, and loyalty, I corrected. Unlike some people. She's earned it? She's a law student. She doesn't know anything about luxury hospitality or estate management. She knows about law, business, and hard work, I said. And she's never tried to steal from me, threaten me, or abandon me on the side of a road. Marcus's expression shifted from anger to something approaching panic. Mom, you can't do this. Think about Amelia and Charlotte. Think about our family. You're destroying everything we've built together. Marcus, you destroyed our family when you left me sprawled on the gravel yesterday. I'm just protecting what I built before you tried to steal it. I wasn't trying to steal anything. I was trying to formalize a partnership that reflected the reality of our business relationship. By threatening me and abandoning me when I didn't. Agree to your demands? Isabella stood up and handed Marcus a folder of documents. Mr. Whitmore, these are formal notices of termination for both you and your wife. You have 48 hours to remove your personal belongings from the main house and vacate the property. Marcus stared at the documents without opening them. You can't evict us. We have rights as long-term residents. You have no rights, Isabella said calmly. You were employees with permission to live on the property as part of your compensation. That permission has been revoked. What about our management contracts? Terminated for cause due to unauthorized financial arrangements and breach of fiduciary duty? Our non-compete agreements? Still in effect. You're prohibited from competing with the estate business for 3 years. Marcus looked from Isabella to me, and I could see him beginning to understand that this wasn't a negotiation. His entire lifestyle, his entire identity as a successful estate manager, his entire future, all of it was disappearing in real time. Mom, please, let's sit down and work this out rationally. I know we've had some disagreements, but we're family. We can find a solution that works for everyone. Marcus, yesterday you lied to me, threatened me, and physically abandoned me when I wouldn't give you my property. You showed me exactly who you are. There's no working this out. I made a mistake. I was frustrated, and I handled the situation badly. But destroying our lives isn't the right response to one bad day. This wasn't one bad day, Marcus. This was the culmination of months of manipulation, financial scheming, and disrespect. Yesterday was just when you finally showed your true colors. Catherine chose that moment to arrive home from her morning workout. She walked into the living room in her designer athletic wear, carrying a green smoothie and looking like she owned the world. "Good morning, Eleanor," she said breezily. "Marcus, why does everyone look so serious? And hello, Maria. I thought you weren't scheduled to clean today." Marcus turned to his wife with an expression of desperation. "Catherine, we have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "Mom has fired us and given half the estate to the housekeeper's daughter." Catherine stared at him for a moment, then laughed. "That's ridiculous. She can't do that." Isabella handed Catherine her own folder of termination documents. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Isabella Gonzalez, and actually, she can do that, and she has done that. You and your husband have 48 hours to vacate the property." Catherine opened the folder and quickly scanned the legal documents. As she read, her expression changed from amused dismissal to confusion to something approaching genuine fear. "This can't be legal," she said finally. "It's completely legal," Isabella replied. "I graduated from Stanford Law School yesterday. These documents were prepared by one of San Francisco's top estate attorneys and filed with all appropriate agencies this morning. But we've invested thousands of dollars of our own money into this property." "You've invested money into improvements for property you don't own, without the owner's authorization. That was your choice. We have contracts, agreements, legal protections. You have employment agreements that have been terminated for cause. All other arrangements were unauthorized and are therefore void." Catherine turned to me with an expression of genuine panic. "Eleanor, this is crazy. You can't throw us out of our home with 2 days' notice. We have children. We have responsibilities. We have nowhere to go." "Catherine, this was never your home. This is my property, and you were allowed to live here as employees. That arrangement has ended. But where will we live? How will we support ourselves? You're destroying our entire lives. You should have thought about that before you tried to steal my business. We weren't stealing anything. We were trying to create a fair partnership. You were trying to pressure me into giving you ownership of property you hadn't earned through threats and manipulation. When that didn't work, Marcus abandoned me on a dirt road. Those were your choices. And these are the consequences." The argument continued for another hour, with Marcus and Catherine becoming increasingly desperate as they realized that their situation was hopeless. They offered to apologize, to accept reduced roles, to work without pay, anything to avoid losing the lifestyle and status they'd built around the estate. But I was done with negotiations. They'd shown me who they really were, and I'd responded accordingly. At 10 a.m., the locksmith arrived to change the remaining locks that Marcus and Catherine might have access to. At 11 a.m., the security company arrived to escort them while they packed their immediate belongings. Watching Marcus and Catherine load their expensive clothes and personal items into suitcases while security guards supervised was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. These were people who'd lived like millionaires for 3 years, who'd treated my property as their own, who'd built their entire identity around wealth and status they'd never actually earned. Now, they were essentially homeless, with no income, no prospects, and no one to blame but themselves. "Mom," Marcus said as he carried the last of his boxes to his BMW, "I hope you realize what you're doing. You're destroying your own family over business disagreements." "Marcus, you destroyed our family when you decided to steal from me rather than earn your own success." And what happens when you need help? When you get older and need family support? Who's going to take care of you? People who actually care about me rather than just my money. Catherine was crying as she packed her jewelry and designer handbags. "Eleanor, please reconsider. We can fix this. We can go back to the way things were before." "Catherine, there's no going back. You've shown me that you see me as an obstacle to getting what you want, rather than as family who deserves respect. What about Amelia and Charlotte? How do I explain to them that their grandmother threw them out of their home? You explained to them that their parents made choices that had consequences, and that lying to yourself about those choices won't change the reality of the situation. By noon, Marcus and Catherine were gone. The BMW loaded with their belongings disappeared down the estate's private road, leaving behind only the silence of justice served. Isabella and I stood on the main house's front porch, looking out over the beautiful property that was now ours to manage and protect. "Mrs. Whitmore," Isabella said, "are you sure about this partnership? It's an incredible gift, but it's also an enormous responsibility." "Isabella, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You've worked harder and shown more integrity than most people I've known. This estate needs someone who understands that wealth is something you earn through effort and character, not something you take through manipulation and threats. What happens now?" "Now we build something better than what Marcus and Catherine had. We run this estate with proper values, we treat people with respect, and we create opportunities for others who deserve them." Over the next 6 months, Isabella and I transformed the Whitmore estate into something even more successful than it had been under Marcus and Catherine's management. Isabella's legal training helped us restructure all the business contracts and vendor relationships to be more efficient and profitable. Her natural intelligence and work ethic made her an excellent estate manager, and her genuine respect for the staff and clients created a much more positive working environment. Most importantly, Isabella understood that the estate was a privilege to manage, not a right to exploit. We hired Maria as our full-time operations coordinator, giving her a substantial salary increase and recognizing her years of dedicated service. We promoted several other long-term staff members to management positions, creating advancement opportunities that Marcus and Catherine had never offered. We also expanded the estate's mission beyond just generating profit. We started hosting charity events for organizations that supported education and economic opportunity for working families. We created internship programs for hospitality students from local colleges. We turned the estate into a place that created value for the community rather than just extracting it. The business thrived under our management. Client satisfaction increased, staff retention improved, and profitability grew as we eliminated the excessive management fees and questionable expenses that Marcus and Catherine had built into the operations. Meanwhile, Marcus and Catherine's situation deteriorated rapidly. Without the estate management income that had supported their lifestyle, they were forced to move into a small apartment in San Rafael. Marcus found work as an assistant manager at a mid-level hotel, earning about a quarter of what he'd been making at the estate. Catherine took a part-time job in event planning for a local catering company. Their expensive cars were repossessed. Amelia and Charlotte had to transfer from their exclusive private school to public school. The designer clothes, the luxury vacations, the sophisticated social life, all of it disappeared as they struggled to adjust to living within their actual means. Most painfully for them, they had to watch the estate's continued success from a distance, knowing that the business they'd thought they owned was thriving without them. 6 months after the eviction, Marcus called me one last time. "Mom," he said, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to tell you something." "What is it, Marcus?" "We lost the apartment. Catherine and I are getting divorced. The girls are going to live with Catherine's parents in Arizona. I'm sorry to hear that your marriage didn't survive." "Mom, we lost everything. Our home, our income, our family, our future, all because of one bad conversation. Marcus, you lost everything because you tried to steal my business and then abandoned me when I wouldn't cooperate. Those were your choices. I know I made mistakes, but the punishment has been way out of proportion to what I did wrong. Marcus, do you understand what you did to me? You lied to me, threatened me, and left me injured and stranded because I wouldn't give you my property. That wasn't a mistake. That was a calculated act of cruelty. And you responded by destroying our entire lives. I responded by protecting myself from people who were trying to victimize me. The damage to your lives was the natural consequence of your own actions. Do you feel any guilt about what happened to us? I thought about that. Questioned for a long moment. Marcus, I feel sad that you became someone capable of doing what you did to me. I feel disappointed that the values I tried to teach you didn't take hold. But I don't feel guilty about protecting myself from your attempts to steal what I'd worked 40 years to build. And there's no possibility of reconciliation? No chance of working things out for the sake of family? Marcus, reconciliation would require you to acknowledge what you did wrong and demonstrate genuine change in your character. As long as you continue to see yourself as the victim in this situation, there's nothing to reconcile. What if I did acknowledge it? What if I admitted that I was wrong and apologized? Then we might be able to have a relationship someday. But it would never again involve you having access to my business or my property. So I'd have to accept being permanently cut off from the family wealth. Marcus, there is no family wealth. There's my wealth, which I earned through decades of hard work. You're not entitled to it just because you're my son. That was the last conversation we ever had. A year after the eviction, Isabella graduated from law school and passed the California bar exam. She decided to practice law part-time while continuing to manage the estate, creating a career that combined her legal training with her business skills. 2 years after the eviction, we expanded the estate's operations to include a small luxury hotel on a neighboring property that came up for sale. Isabella handled all the legal aspects of the acquisition and development, while I provided guidance on hospitality operations. 3 years after the eviction, Isabella married a fellow attorney she'd met during law school. Their wedding reception was held at the Whitmore estate, with over 200 guests celebrating a love story that had begun with a young woman working multiple jobs to support her family's dreams. 5 years after the eviction, Isabella and her husband had their first child, a daughter they named Elena, in honor of the opportunities that started with our partnership. Today, 7 years after Marcus drove away and left me on that gravel road, the Whitmore estate is more successful than it's ever been. Isabella has become one of Marin County's most respected young business leaders, and our partnership has created opportunities for dozens of families who needed a chance to build better lives. We never hear from Marcus or Catherine anymore. According to social media posts I occasionally see, Marcus eventually found steady work in hotel management in Phoenix, where he lives modestly, but apparently peacefully. Catherine remarried and moved to Colorado. Amelia and Charlotte are both in college now, funded by scholarships and student loans rather than family wealth. I don't take any satisfaction in their struggles, but I don't regret the choices I made to protect myself and my life's work. Because sometimes, the most important lesson you can teach someone is that actions have consequences, especially when those actions involve betraying the people who love you. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about building something better with people who actually deserve your trust and support. The young woman who used to clean my house now owns half of a multi-million-dollar estate. The Zai son who tried to steal my business now manages other people's hotels for hourly wages. That reversal of fortune didn't happen by accident. It happened because one person understood that success comes from hard work and integrity, while the other person believed that success could be taken through manipulation and threats. Isabella earned everything she received by demonstrating the values that Marcus and Catherine abandoned. And in the end, that's exactly how it should be. What Marcus didn't know, when he drove away from that gravel road 7 years ago, was that he wasn't just abandoning his mother. He was abandoning his inheritance, his future, and his place in a family that valued character over convenience. What he also didn't know was that his 70-year-old mother would respond to his betrayal not with helpless tears, but with strategic action that would teach him the most expensive lesson of his life. The lesson that you don't steal from someone who spent 40 years learning how to protect what's theirs. The lesson that family isn't about blood, it's about respect. loyalty, and shared values, and the lesson that sometimes the most devastating revenge is simply refusing to be a victim. I gave my estate to someone more deserving, and I've never regretted it for a single day. The end epilogue, if you're wondering. What you would have done in my situation? Ask yourself this. How far would you go to protect what you'd spent a lifetime building? And how much would you be willing to sacrifice to teach someone that their actions have consequences? Let me know in the comments what you think about Isabella's incredible transformation and whether Marcus and Catherine got what they deserved. And if you enjoyed this story of family betrayal and ultimate justice, make sure to check out these other incredible tales of people who refused to be victims when their own families tried to take advantage of them. Remember to hit that like button, subscribe for more stories of justice served, and comment where you're watching from. Because trust me, there are more stories like this one coming that will restore your faith in the power of standing up for yourself, no matter what your age. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.